うまくコネクションが HDMI からうまくその時点でうちのカメラを広角にして、で、ちょっと両方撮れるような感じでやる。その時点から変更します。はい。で、なので、これから、うちのカメラだけのやつに切り替えてくれれば。うまくつながらなくなったその時点で方針変更とお願いします。
動いてますか？はい。オフ。多分オンじゃなかった。さっき。あ、まあオフ。 Ah. Gidole?
Yeah.
Ah,
Don't spoil my presentation.
sorry, I just thought that people come in, but I didn't know it's automatic. Does it work automatically?
I have no idea. I think you should just press full screen and pause it.
Ah, I didn't even know it's possible.
This is always a surprise for everyone, including me.
Linux, you don't have this kind of thing.
Linux have different issues.
Yeah, that wasn't. But good to that you're here.
Yeah. Were you worried?
No. So far, everybody made it, or just came by Skype or so.
Are you moderating?
Yeah, I just introduced you quickly. I don't see.
So you have. I'm
Sitting here. Should I tell you? So I can shortly give you a sign here. Like 15 is 15 minutes, and 15 minutes, 20 is that you have only 20 minutes and 25. It's not a countdown. It's
So do they go to 50 or?
no, you have 30 minutes. So
Just in case. 50
no. So I'm kind of lost if you continue speaking after 25. I don't know how to stop you. I had
You
this
can
problem
just
before.
throw the juice in my direction.
I let something drop. So that's the opposite direction. But I think from when you're 25, it's kind of obvious.
Yeah.
That's,
Okay, let's start with the last session of the day. And Ilya is doing the start, the first presentation, explaining us how OpenStreetMap can become adult, maybe, or at least the title is very interesting. So, please.
Okay. Hello, everyone. The title is actually very dumb. Let's skip to the next slide. I'm Ilya Zverev. I have been in OpenStreetMap for 7 years, and I've got something to say. So, OpenStreetMap has passed its infancy stage. That is the idea that I spoke about a lot at many conferences and private talks. Like, it got a lot of objects, a lot of road. It compares well with Google Maps. And, well, the database is like 35 gigabytes now, and the project is 13. So yeah, definitely not a small project. It must have grown. But with time, it's becoming quite obvious that OpenStreetMap, I'm not sure OpenStreetMap is mature, because maturity is not about quantity, it's not about size. It is about communicating well with others and about taking responsibility for everything you do and, well, making money. So when you look at OpenStreetMap from this position, I'm not so sure. So let me start with a couple of questions. Who here has mapped everything out of their home area? Are there any mappers here, actually? Yeah, cool. 8 mappers. Yeah, so usually when you look at a home or at an area where a mapper lives, it looks pretty great, like footways and benches and obviously addresses and shops, but when you look a kilometer or two away, you can see a lot of white spots. And to an untrained eye, OpenStreetMap looks pretty well. Almost all the roads are there, you can use it for routing, and it looks good. But for a mapper, when you look into the map, you see that it misses a lot. For every shop mapped, it misses 10 other shops around that were just skipped. It doesn't have footways, a lot of areas. Even in the middle, even in Germany, which is considered one of the best mapped countries, you can see a lot of white spots in the cities. So the volunteers have been working on that for like 13 years, and it's becoming pretty obvious that just volunteers cannot map the world in a reasonable time, that being their lifetime. The humanitarian mapping team tries to change that. It gathers hundreds of volunteer mappers, like every week, and they map the whole countries in Africa, in Asia, and so on. And they often boast about the results in their Twitter, in their blog. Like, we have mapped 500,000 buildings and thousands of kilometers of roads and so on. But then you read news from Mapbox, and they say that in just a week they have imported 1 million buildings, and you compare these numbers and not so sure. So for a long time we have also talked about how OSM is good enough for commercial applications. I remember a talk from 2012 about how OSM is good enough, someone from Richard. But it didn't convince many companies, and they have still been using Google Maps, Yandex Maps in Russia, and so on. But recently, you can see that OpenStreetMap is finally becoming very popular in commercial contexts. Almost everyone uses OpenStreetMap in Facebook, in Foursquare, Story, Snapchat and stuff. So OSM is really becoming popular and good for commercial use. And I think we a bit missed it because we tried to pitch OpenStreetMap to businesses. It didn't work out as good as we hoped to, and we continued mapping, and then finally businesses noticed OpenStreetMap, but who cares now? So companies are using OpenStreetMap, and they see the map is good enough, but there's something missing. So they need some area mapped or improved, and they see it's OpenStreetMap, so they go to the source and ask them to improve the map. So they go to Mapbox, because front-end OpenStreetMap and front-end world is basically Mapbox. They have made all of our tools, and companies are using Mapbox.js instead of Leaflet.js, and so on. And Mapbox actually answers, unlike us. They have mappers employed who actually improve the map, and who validate it, who who care about the quality of the map. And in the main hall right now, they're explaining how they do it. So companies are actually satisfied with OpenStreetMap through Mapbox. That's pretty great. And they use OpenStreetMap, and sometimes they want to contribute. And isn't that what we always wanted? With our wire license, and we always asked please contribute back. So yeah, they do. But when a person wants to contribute to OpenStreetMap, they map their house, like an address and shop. When a company wants to contribute to OpenStreetMap, they map the whole region, like import all addresses and stuff. And that's when it becomes a bit complicated. That is called imports. There were some good imports, like this one from Netherlands. It was pretty interesting in terms of they removed most of the things that were there, and on an empty map they put commercial data. Imagine I will remove the area you have drawn completely and put my scribbles over it. Will it be okay with you? And it should be, because OpenStreetMap is not your map. The moment you draw something, you should release it and forget about it. Otherwise, you're in for a lot of misunderstandings and pain. So yeah, this was good import. I doubt it can be done nowadays, but still. There were some bad imports, like this one, still not reverted. It has been there for 4 or 5 years. There were many other imports. If you open the catalog in our wiki, then you will get tired even scrolling it down. There are so many entries, like several hundreds, from 2005 and up to current date. And it grows constantly. It's enormous. So the map is getting better not only through volunteer mapping, but also through imports. And it's obviously a good street map now, because a lot of roads were imported, like Tiger dataset in US, which is getting more polished with time, I assume. Good street map with an asterisk. Like it's still mostly Europe and USA, and you've got a lot of white spots in Africa and Asia and Latin America and stuff. It lacks not only some roads, very few roads actually, but also a lot of points of interest. And what to do with it? So imports can solve that. Imports are getting better. First, the Facebook is trying to improve our map through not importing data and not volunteer mapping rules, but it takes satellite imagery and automatically traces roads using computer vision and neural networks, and then imports to OpenStreetMap. So the map is created almost automatically. There were a lot of issues with that, and there will be, of course, but they make progress, and tomorrow morning they will talk about it. So you should see it. And also SEO companies. Search engine optimization. What they do is they increase the visibility of companies. Usually that means in search engines, but also they put companies on the map so you can find them. For a long time, this meant they put companies on Google Maps, on TomTom, Here Maps, Yandex Maps in Russia, and so on. And recently, since, as I was saying, OpenStreetMap has gained visibility, like Maps.me application has got 80 million installs, so it's pretty big. SEO companies have started looking at OpenStreetMap, and for past couple of years, they have been trying to import their data to put their clients on our map also. It didn't always go well. Look at the tourism tag. There were a lot of discussions around that. When I say discussions, I mean, you know what I mean. So they tried another way. Some of these companies have contacted us. I work at Maps.me. So we would help importing this data to OpenStreetMap. Right now, I think there are 4 companies that contacted us, and all this is still in process. Yeah, so I have written the tool OSM Conflator, which basically takes data from the company, like all the 7-Eleven shops, looks at OpenStreetMap and compares the data and improves OSM data. The tool is pretty great. It can be configured using large Python files. It had documentation, 13 kilobytes in the wiki, and so on. It works pretty well. For example, I have used it to, I tested it on fuel stations in the United Kingdom. Yeah, and this is a visualization that the OSM Conflator provides. And it went pretty well. So there are import guidelines. Every import should follow import guidelines that are on our wiki. And 2 out of 6 steps there concern contacting the community. So if you're importing fuel stations in the United Kingdom, you go to Talk GB mailing list and also to imports mailing list and post the thing you are doing there. Like, please check it, or do you feel we should do it, and stuff. And the moment you post it, you know that a lot of angry mappers will read it. And it happens. I was testing 2 imports, one in Russia, one in Great Britain, and the response was underwhelming. Well, it was very hard to read first, because something you spend a week on preparing, and then people just come and say that I like this import, but you should go and check all the points yourself on the ground. Otherwise, it's okay. Or okay, but please share the money you're getting out of this. Yeah, we don't get any money out of this. Yeah. So I've got a couple useful comments, of course, but overall tone was quite bad. So what I'm talking about is that I'm an OpenStreetMap for many years, and I'm used to this tone, and I perceived it and did something. But regular people, not people who sit in this room, I guess, but people who earn money, for example, from their work, and who don't have time, don't have a couple of years to study our map features wiki page, or I don't know, JOSM editor. They won't stay after getting this kind of response. You cannot expect them to learn everything you know. And with that, they don't have a point of entry to OpenStreetMap. If a company wants to put their 10 shops to Google Maps, they don't have to learn their map editor. They just send a CSV file, and it goes on Google Maps. Or fill a simple form, so it is done automatically and updated like weekly. We don't have such things in OpenStreetMap, and it feels like nobody likes imported stuff in OpenStreetMap. But points of interest are the second thing people notice on the map. Roads are great for navigation, but you have to have somewhere to go to. And if there is no shop or address on the map, then all these roads are useless. And you cannot expect volunteer mappers to add all the points of interest. I doubt even around this venue there are all points of interest mapped. And I doubt around your house all the shops are up to date and closed shops are removed and so on. Around my house, I have mapped some shops like 3 years ago and haven't updated them since. They might have gone, I don't care actually. And that's all over the world. So the main way we can get proper points of interest is mostly by contacting companies that care that their amenities are on the map. And with that, we have to accept that there will be errors. And of course, not the kind of errors I have shown, like with the checkerboard import, but it's okay to have 1 or even 5% of bad stuff, obsolete shortcuts. So, because if you stop that, you prevent importing 95% of good stuff. The thing is that the current process for importing is not about fixing errors. It's about vetting the whole import. Well, not everyone thinks so, but most loud people actually do. So we have to fix our importing process to be more tolerable to errors in imports. Right. Yeah. So no mapping is actually perfect. When I asked how many of you who map perfectly the area, well, nobody has raised hand. So why do you expect that other people will map perfectly? Either volunteers or companies. There is no such thing as a perfect map. But to make a perfect map, to strive to be a perfect map, you have to be tolerant to imperfections. So, to conclude, OpenStreetMap is growing up. Of course, it's 13, and the plain file is 35 gigabytes. And it's certainly not in its infancy, but the community is fighting it more and more actively with each year. It's fighting its growth because it still wants OSM to be small, so they can map it by themselves to stay craft mappers. Maybe. Well, that is normal for this stage of growth, but eventually OpenStreetMap should be more mature. And for that, it should communicate well with others, not driving contributors away, but actually inviting more people and more companies to put themselves on the map. And it should take responsibility in the map, not pass it on to people and organizations that don't have resources to learn everything about OpenStreetMap. And that means tolerating errors, fixing them, but inviting people to add more correct stuff. Yeah, I guess that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there are questions. So, who wants to ask a question?
Should I? Yes. Okay. The thing about the imports, I wonder what your perspective on that is. I mean, anyone could set up a project like OpenStreetMap. It just takes a couple of servers. The technical infrastructure is easy. The complicated or the difficult bit is getting the huge number of people behind the cause and getting them to contribute the data. So if you have a situation where lots of people, lots of companies import their data into OpenStreetMap, someone else sets up a competing project, all the companies could easily go to this other place and contribute their data there as well. So currently OpenStreetMap has something special, which is all the time invested by all those people who fix things and add things all the time. Now you're saying sort of your vision of maturity is that this becomes less important with time and it becomes a bigger pillar of OpenStreetMap, that we have more imports from big companies and so on. Does that not mean that OpenStreetMap also loses this singular thing, this special thing that we have, and that it becomes much easier for someone else to just set up something else that also takes the same import data and puts that all in a database, maybe with a better tagging scheme, or fixes some of the danger if more and more data that we get does not come from individual surveys? Does that not risk our sort of our unique position in the empire of mapping platforms?
Well, I have 2 points. First, Google Maps is basically a catalog of imports. Yandex Maps in Russia is basically a lot of imports as well. And they each have more users than OpenStreetMap. So I don't think users will go away. Then the map is never complete. If all the points of interest in your city will be imported, you will still have a lot of footways to draw, a lot of road attributes, a lot of child playgrounds. And the thing with OpenStreetMap is that it has infinite depth. So if companies import all the top level stuff, like roads and points of interest, you still can go more into micro mapping and managing data and so on. And there is only so far very few actually data sets you can import, because I doubt you can find any data sets for Africa or for countries outside of Western Europe and United States. So there is still a lot to map. And well, when you're hiking, you can find a lot of stuff that is not on any maps. So there's always something to find in OpenStreetMap. So I don't think that even if we import everything, we will lose things. We will be out of things to map. So I don't see why volunteer mappers will go away. And companies, what companies get out of that is the complete and uniform map of the whole world. Of course, they can import data from their country into their own map, and a lot of companies do actually. But if a company is a map of the whole world, then they have nowhere to go to.
Is that okay? Otherwise, who else wants to ask?
Yeah, thanks for that. And yeah, in summary, I'd say I'd agree with your characterization as it stands. It would be the original idea of the OpenStreetMap was to create something that was quite static as well. And the next frontier, I'd say, is something around much more dynamic data. There's not an awful lot of scope within the current data framework to ingest data, which would be very useful in our work in volunteer for an organisation called Map Action, which works in disasters essentially. And so we're quite interested in how you would ingest a lot of data to improve the map very quickly in order for us to understand the situation. But for us not to have to do it on our Esri or QGIS systems, and for us to do it in a way that could then be used by lots of different organisations. And OpenStreetMap seems like it could be one of the data structures that could do that. And so, yeah, removing some of those barriers for uploading data would be a really big step in the right direction. In terms of the types of inputs you're thinking about, are you also thinking about feature extraction, things from satellite imagery, which could be uploaded into OSM, or are you talking about purely kind of commercial data sets?
Well, for a long time I was anti-import myself, and I still think that importing geometry is very dangerous and should be done with a lot of caution. So I don't think Facebook will succeed in tracing, automatic tracing of imagery in at least a couple of years. I can talk about point of interest import, because that's what I'm doing. I have hundreds, thousands points of interest coming up, and all of this has to be uploaded and then regularly updated. So at this scale, all the tools are almost there, and it is pretty okay with OpenStreetMap because it's a big database and API is pretty good, so it can do it. And the rest of the question I didn't understand.
Okay, yeah, so we are actually also then have to go to the next presentation, except there's a short one. Somebody else wants to give a comment. Then, okay.
Thanks for the talk. If I may, there are, I personally work in a university as a researcher. We don't contribute to the project specifically, but we work on the data, so we know the data. And the problem of import is also the fact that we have so many data we collect, in particular for point of interest, because directs are basic things like that, we don't know what to do with that. I have my own stack on my own server. Now I have a machinery that I have extracted from OpenStreetMap plus my stuff, which is crazy. So please do something, because it's not just companies. I mean, there are municipalities, public administration. We are receiving so many information that will contribute a lot to OpenStreetMap that we don't know actually how to do it.
Okay.
Programmatically.
Let's just talk after all these talks, and I can show you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilya. Okay, our next talk is about diagrams of OpenStreetMap, and the speaker is Wood. If you don't know how he looks like, you probably know his name from blog post and from the community.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for a great talk from Ilya there. There's going to be some slides towards the end of this talk which touch on very similar topics. And I'll give my slightly different perspective on them if I get that far, although I've done rather too many slides, so apologies in advance. I'm going to have to talk quite fast to flick through these. This is a talk about diagrams, and it's really a talk that, an idea that I came to from my previous State of the Map talk, where I was talking about the long tail of OpenStreetMap. And I started that talk by going through some visualizations, maps, interesting kind of ways of visualizing the whole of OpenStreetMap in a grand, broad picture, and went on to present the long tail of OpenStreetMap, which kind of culminated in several different thoughts, but this is my favorite one. So this is showing the long tail graph, which you can just about see a curve at the bottom there, a very steep-sided curve. This is showing the population of OpenStreetMap, all of the people chipping in a very small bit at the bottom of the graph. And on the far left-hand side of the graph is this spike of sort of elite mappers, this very small number of people who contribute the vast majority of the data to OpenStreetMap. So this is a graph more than a diagram, but obviously here I've layered on top some comments and some thoughts where I'm thinking about the messaging around OpenStreetMap. And when you look at the long tail, I really feel like it explains a lot about OpenStreetMap and the kind of promotion that we need to do. So on the one hand, we need to get more people to join the long tail by at least visiting the OpenStreetMap website. And then we need to get people to sign up by saying, editing is awesome, that's the message. And then we need to get more of those people to be bold and really do more editing, to become more dedicated editors. So a lot of the stuff that we do in and around OpenStreetMap is actually somewhere on that line. You know, we're working towards getting people to move up the graph. And I really like this because it's kind of it's a diagram that sort of, in some sense, encompasses all of OpenStreetMap somehow, or one aspect of it. And so I wanted to try and find some other diagrams like this. And I realized that it's something I've been doing for a while. Actually, one of my early contributions to OpenStreetMap, besides editing the text of the wiki, was to come up with this OSM Components diagram. So this was to help developers understand what's going on with various pieces of technology that people are talking about in OpenStreetMap. You may recognize it better if I show it like this. So we used to have a develop page on the wiki, and the component diagram was sort of set in there as a little illustration. But I think it's quite an interesting diagram because it's sat there on the wiki and it's gone through several iterations. And the iteration, particularly the early iteration, is quite interesting for me because it shows how my understanding of the technologies have developed. So I kind of started off getting it a bit wrong. We've added potlatch there. This is very early history. Added the Yahoo aerial imagery. Here we're showing the planet dump connected to the protocol interface, which later gets renamed as the API down at the bottom there. So you can see that I've made a mistake there connecting the planet dump to the API, which is not what happens. The planet dump comes out of the database directly. So this has sort of progressed over the course of a year or two towards that in 2009. And I guess I put it on the wiki there hoping that people would chip in and collaborate with me on making a component diagram. And eventually that's what happened, kind of. Ivan Sanchez came along and redrew the diagram in quite a spectacular way, so putting lots more technology boxes on there and coming up with this much more impressive diagram. With the wiki comment, he said, brand new architecture diagram. Little Spanish guy. He said, brand new architecture diagram. I was getting bored of the old one, which, by the way, looked amateurish. Thank you very much, Ivan Sanchez. But he was right, wasn't he? It was looking a bit amateurish. This is looking more impressive, at least. Although, obviously, going for more complexity in the diagram, which may or may not be a good thing. And it carried on iterating, actually. So through till 2012, we got as far as this. Other people doing things like adding colour to it. And in 2012, the wiki, the front page actually had the wiki delinked a little bit, and the develop page removed the diagram. So actually, from 2012 onwards, it stagnated a little bit. Nobody really looked at the component diagram as much. It wasn't as exposed to many eyeballs as it was before. And so it wasn't until my preparation for this talk that I've started doing some iterations on this diagram. So you can see that on the top left there, I've added more editors in. I've added the ID editor, which is obviously an important update, and some mobile editors as well. It's very important. But on this right-hand side of the diagram, it's still bothering me a bit. How can we show the kind of the output side of OpenStreetMap, everything that sprouts out from the planet dumps? And in particular, I think vector tiles is something that's missing from this diagram. It doesn't really show how the rendering stacks are working fully. So another iteration on this diagram, which I'm kind of unveiling for you today, as it were, is this one. So I've completely redrawn the right-hand side of the diagram, showing other web mapping libraries and showing mobile SDKs as well, of course, and a hugely important new kind of output from OpenStreetMap. And you can see that these things are hooked into vector tiles. So for a long time, raster tile was the only show in town. Nowadays, vector tiles can be fed in directly into web maps, particularly mobile SDKs, to come up with new and exciting, more dynamic kinds of interface. Also tried to show here the different layers that are actually shown on the front page map, so they kind of link that's why we're including the hot renderer and the transport renderer, for example. These are map renderings that are made available on the OpenStreetMap front page. So yeah, a few little iterations on this diagram, especially for this talk. Oh, I should have zoomed in. There we go. That's a more zoomed in view of the right-hand side. But vector tiles is, I've kind of glossed over some detail with this. I've shown vector tiles here, kind of, you can feed vector tiles into the front-end technologies, or you can feed it into, you can use it to then render raster tiles actually on the server. But not really going into any of the different technologies that are involved in using up the different formats of vector tiles that are out there. And this is a diagram that I really feel is missing. I'm not the only one. I came across this diagram which made me laugh. Somebody posted an OpenStreetMap help question. It's kind of saying, map data from OpenStreetMap, map style in some format, question mark, what is it? What is that thing in the middle there? And it just made me laugh because it kind of doesn't answer any questions at all. But doesn't it liven up the question? It's a much more interesting post on the OSM Q&A site because it's got a diagram. I found this diagram which starts to answer some of the questions in my mind, although it confuses me more actually. So I'm not quite sure why the data sources arrow is pointing upwards to that. And it's obviously, it's talking about Mapbox very specifically, rather than showing a lot of different vector tile technologies. But yeah, starting to answer, it's starting to be the diagram that I'm looking for. This was done by some students who are documenting open source projects. So this is my best attempt at the diagram we're looking for. As you can see, it was scribbled in a pub, and I was meaning to draw this up as a proper diagram, but I got home from the pub and realised that it didn't make any sense. So
It was late at night.
this is the diagram I'm looking for, in the sense that I want a diagram with a box for Tangram and Tangram Play and MapGL and MapboxGL and Mapbox Studio, Mapbox Streets, OSM to Vector Tile, which is now called Open Vector Tile, Tile Maker is a separate project to create the vector tiles. There's this concept of schemas of the vector tiles. Basically, this is all really fuzzy in my head, and I would love a diagram that makes it clearer. But that's the best diagram I've come up with for it. So this is a different diagram I did. Actually, I think I did this diagram around the time that Ivan redrew my OSM Components diagram, so I thought, well, right, I'll make a better diagram then. The idea of this is kind of to strip down a bit of the complexity of the components diagram. Don't try and name lots of specific technologies, but show the OpenStreetMap ecosystem and just the important components. It's actually not just a diagram, it's an animation that I prepared. So I've actually given this talk to at least 3 or 4 different occasions to technical audiences to explain how OpenStreetMap works. So I start by talking about how you make web maps and how important the raw data is. Go on to try and explain that, so showing the linking of the API and the Planet downloads. There's where all the people doing the editing comes in. And obviously the Planet downloads is quite an interesting, or an important part of this tree of ecosystem, because it enables this third-party tier of other things going on. And that's showing what the core components are. And I think it's quite important to mention that the tile server is not core actually, and the OSM tile server is nothing special about it. It's just linked off the Planet downloads like any other tile server. So I think that's quite a kind of, hopefully an inspiring message that you can take to developers to say, look, you can run your own tile server using the same technologies. And lots of big companies now running their own tile servers. So MapSend, Thunder Forest, Mapbox. Here's a diagram I came across by somebody else, by Steve Bauer. Similar idea of putting the OSM data in the middle of the diagram, and everything radiates out from it. Here's a diagram which is covering some similar grounds. It's not actually about OpenStreetMap, but it's showing the tile rendering stuff happening on the left-hand side and feeding into a web map display. And this diagram is also showing the idea of feature layers, which I think is quite quite important to explain to web developers, because that's the kind of that's the bit that you get exposed to as a web developer if you're used to working with Google Maps and you want to dump a load of markers on the map. You know, that's the bit that you learn about how to draw markers and draw lines on a map, and you tend not to know about the left-hand side. So it's important to explain to developers that OpenStreetMap powers that in the same way that Google Maps can. So I'm covering some fairly technical diagrams here, by the way, but I'm going to come on to some less technical types of diagrams, or mixture. Here's one of the database, the OpenStreetMap Rails app database. I showed this to the sysadmins in London, and we played a game of guess the database table. So on the left-hand side, the big one on the left-hand side, that's the user table. Lots of stuff linking to the user table. And there's another one that's well linked on the right-hand side, which is the change sets table. Obviously, you can zoom in on that and you can read the field names. In fact, it might be a more useful diagram if it just showed the name of the database table without the field names. But that's something that Komapa is maintaining. It seems to be quite up to date. I came across this diagram as well, which is a similar thing. This is actually automatically generated from the models within the Rails code base. But it's 9 years old now, so needs a bit of an update, that diagram. But it's quite interesting that you can automatically generate these things. And on the topic of automatically generating things, I really like this one. So this is moving away from tech topics now in a way. This is a diagram showing tagging, OpenStreetMap tagging, and transitions of tags. So the example I picked out there is showing the tag for amenity equals swimming pool, amenity equals fountain, and amenity equals drinking water. And it's showing the number of times that these points of interest have changed between these tags. So people making corrections to OpenStreetMap to reclassify things. And you can see that quite often fountain is being reclassified as drinking water, which suggests that that's a common tagging mistake and that people are making that correction. And he did a diagram of all of the different amenity tags, and actually he could just as easily generate a diagram of all of the different tags under other keys as well. I think it's really interesting. It's very powerful as well because he's built this using the history dump, not just the planet file, but the history dump, because he has to go back in time and look at the transitions occurring within the tags to create this diagram. It's really quite neat. This is another diagram which is kind of UK specific. It's actually a diagram I've presented many times, but it's copied from Steve Coast. So when Steve was originally trying to kickstart OpenStreetMap, he was explaining it in this way. He was saying OpenStreetMap is pegged down on the 0 price point. It's on the bottom of this graph. It's not costing anything. Whereas Ordnance Survey, high quality data set, very expensive. It got more complicated in the UK, so I made this second diagram to try to explain to UK developers, because there are various Ordnance Survey open data sets now. And a bit of a misconception, a lot of people think that all of Ordnance Survey's data sets are open, which is not really true. They're still kind of clinging on to the idea of selling high-value data sets. Anyway, something a bit different again. This is an organisation chart. So moving away from technical stuff now. I really like this. For me, this was kind of an illuminating moment when Tyler Radford, I think, prepared this, and it shows the staff. So suddenly you get a feel for how many people are employed by HOT, what they're doing, and also mugshots. I love a diagram with some mugshots included, because you can really get a feel for who it is you're talking about. But of course, HOT has a volunteer community as well, massive volunteer community of people mapping, and quite a big volunteer community of people who are signed up to the working groups, which of course is a similar situation to the OSMF. So here's a diagram of the working groups, or a hierarchical diagram of the OSMF. It's not much of a hierarchy, is it? I think in a way that if I were to elevate the importance of some of the working groups, I'd say the data working group and the operations working group are a bit more important than some of the others. But essentially that's the structure of the OSMF. But it gets me thinking, like, the trouble with this diagram and also the staff diagram of HOT is it's not really showing the volunteer community very well. So I was trying to think of a new way of showing a disorganisational structure. I kind of think of it like this, so it's more of a blobby blancmange. The community is contributing to this thing, they're trying to reach for the sky and build this thing. But each individual person may contribute to a certain thing. And then they might go away and disappear, so they might build a really awesome tool, really awesome bit of technology, and then kind of leave OpenStreetMap, or they may continue to maintain it. So it's this slightly shaky ground that things are built on, sometimes it feels like. So in the middle of this diagram, I've tried to represent the big OpenStreetMap projects, so the code base of the core of OpenStreetMap, but also things like the ID editor and the JOSM editor. And here you've got people really collaborating, but still in a slightly kind of, it's all volunteer based, and you know, you can't necessarily rely on somebody to implement the feature that you want implemented. The other thing we're showing is some big blobby bits off to the side, so that might be an individual pet project that somebody's doing. And what tends to happen actually with OpenStreetMap is that a pet project will come along, like Overpass API, for example, and it gets subsumed. It starts to feel like something more kind of central to OpenStreetMap over time. But what I wanted to try and do is this diagram. So I kind of think of some of the organisation building types things that we do. Things like making working groups and perhaps funded projects. Things like having companies backing programming work, or universities backing or running servers, for example. Perhaps even things like paid staff. So I think in the HOT context, paid staff, I think of it this way. All of these organisation building things are forming a solid framework that we can build our blobby blancmange of a community on top of. And it helps us to reach the community to the sky a bit higher. Not so much a diagram, more of a metaphor, really. Okay, here's another bunch of diagrams, mapping workflows. So this particular diagram, you probably remember it from the beginner's guide. It's actually been removed from the beginner's guide now, but for many years, this was kind of a thing sat at the front page of the beginner's guide. It's a bit weird because it's setting out one person's vision of the order of events that you contribute to OpenStreetMap. Obviously, it's GPS focused, and it's even got a step for uploading data before you do your editing, which presumably means uploading your GPS traces, which, you know, nowadays that's not really necessarily the process that you're going to flow. So it got me thinking, how can we do a better diagram than this for showing the different steps that you might go through, the different workflows that you might follow. So at the top here we've got GPS oriented things. From back in the day, we used to, I think a lot of the time we recorded GPS tracks and then we sort of used our local knowledge then to fill in street names, for example. But then people got more sophisticated with different blendings of techniques, so using waypoints, writing down notes on pieces of paper correlated with the waypoints, or this thing of using timestamp photos, so you walk around with a GPS unit and take photos at the same time. I think some people are still following that workflow, or even using a dictaphone. But then, of course, there's always been a slightly simpler, low-tech version of this, so a paper-based workflow, people making notes, printing stuff out. And I think even in the early days there was a workflow of editing at home, so a bunch of people would create a spider web of GPS tracks, and then you could just edit it at home. If you know the area, you could just sit there and draw over the GPS tracks. It's a way of contributing. But we're missing the imagery here, so let's bring in imagery, and suddenly there's a combinatorial explosion of different workflows happening here. So the lower part of this diagram now is showing imagery-based workflows. So suddenly you can use Bing imagery, or Yahoo imagery as it was when it first introduced. Now down at the bottom of this diagram, probably can't see it very well, but editing at home just using imagery, that's actually become a very big kind of contribution to what's known as armchair mapping. So anyway, let's try and condense this down a bit because it's getting out of control. So we've got kind of GPS workflows, paper-based workflows, and just armchair mapping with imagery. Obviously, when you're editing at home, you use the imagery as well, generally. If the imagery is available, you'll use it. Now, on the paper side of things, I want to draw attention to a really interesting workflow. So I call it the Lubumbashi workflow. This is where people in Lubumbashi went out and used map printouts using the field papers system to get a printout, write lots of notes. We actually took the pieces of paper physically to mapathons in London and Berlin and did a bunch of editing there. So this was, I guess you could call it armchair mapping. I'm not really sure whether it counts as armchair mapping because these are people who haven't been out surveying, but they're very much using survey-based data that was gathered deliberately for OpenStreetMap. The Lubumbashi workflow is great, actually. I love it. We should do more of that. But I'm going to simplify that down, condense it down. But it does make me think as well, under armchair mapping, obviously the imagery is available, but something similar to the Lubumbashi workflow in a way is this thing of using other sources. So now we've got street level photos, which is really interesting. That's almost as good as going out and surveying yourself, surely, looking at OpenStreetCam or Mapillary images. And likewise, OpenStreetMap notes, if an OpenStreetMap note has been put in a place and there's enough description in there, that's fine. That's enough detail for you to not have to go there yourself, if there's enough description in there. And also community imports. So now I'm touching on imports here. So there's a certain class of imports where we're taking a third-party data set and we're getting the community to sort of merge it into the OpenStreetMap database. I think a lot of the recent buildings imports were done this way. So you take a bit of data, you check whether it looks correct, and then you upload it. These are all kinds of armchair mapping, really. So I'm going to add some more yellow boxes here. The tools are obviously Tasking Manager and Map Roulette are examples of tools that are really powering different types of armchair mapping. You can think of them as guiding people's mapping process. So if you're a big humanitarian mapper familiar with Tasking Manager, then bottom right here is the workflow that you've been following. I'm adding in some more workflows here because we've not mentioned mobile mapping. So when smartphones came along, suddenly the awkward GPS track and timestamp photo thing is no longer necessary. You could just take photos with your smartphone, they get the EXIF tags, you know where the photos have been taken. So that's a nice simplified photo-based mapping, which is the workflow that I do a lot. Another workflow that I do a lot is I use my phone with Vespucci or GoMap. Vespucci on Android, GoMap on iPhone, which shortcuts the two steps actually. So suddenly we're gathering data and inputting it immediately. So that's why we get this big wide bar across the diagram. So that is a summary of workflows. But some of you may have noticed that I'm touching on the thing that Ilya was just talking about of different, or we can group these into the survey-based mappers, the armchair mappers, and people who want to do imports. I really see it as kind of a spectrum here. So on the one hand, you've got survey-based mapping, which is painstakingly slow, obviously. It needs many people to be involved, really. The idea is to get lots of people involved in order to do that. Conversely, imports is an example of something where you're slapping in data quickly. And if it's done badly, then OpenStreetMap might start to feel like a data dumping ground. So obviously the advantage is that it's fast, but it needs to be done carefully. And you'll notice that I'm straying into OpenStreetMap tribal politics here, really. So there was a blog post from Mike Nagurski talking about craft mappers, humanitarian mappers, and robot mappers. He was actually thinking of the Facebook example when he talked about robot mappers, but more broadly, I think we can say imports is the other extreme, and it's on a spectrum as far as I'm concerned, as I say. But I do also see it this way, which is that mapping your neighbourhood is really the core idea of OpenStreetMap. It's all OpenStreetMap has ever been about, getting lots of people involved in mapping your neighbourhood. And just the idea of many hands make light work. OpenStreetMap is a mass collaboration project. That's what it's all about. And so these imports and armchair mapping are extensions of the core idea. Now, I'm not going to stand here and say that these are bad, actually. But they are extensions of the idea, and we need to, I feel like they need to be carried out with due deference to the core idea of OpenStreetMap, which is a mass collaboration, people mapping their own neighbourhood. But there is this kind of, I thought about using a grumpy cat picture here, actually. I didn't. I should have done, shouldn't I? I would have tied in nicely with Ilya's talk. So there is this group of craft mappers, and I agree with Mike McGursky's blog post to the extent that there is this grumpy group of grumpy people who are a little bit snarky on the back channels and that kind of thing. And I just wish that actually they'd come out in the open and criticise negatively, because we do need to tell people off when they're putting poor quality data into OpenStreetMap, either through armchair mapping or through the more extreme poor quality imports. But at the same time, there's positive things here. We need to actually celebrate the examples of where people are doing it well. So if an import is really well documented and the data is good quality, let's talk about the good sides of it. If a humanitarian mapping is done well, I think there's a quality aspect to this. Humanitarian mapping is really trying hard to improve the validation work that we do with the tasking manager. But there's also this core idea of mapping your neighbourhood. We want to get humanitarian mapping projects to try and engage the local community somehow. So we've seen a couple of really great talks at this conference of people who've done humanitarian mapping, people who've got, the task manager grid's got lots of people involved in drawing around lots of buildings. And then the map has gone on to be really useful on the ground, with people contributing more data on the ground. Those kind of examples we need to celebrate much more. And I really want to say to the grumpy craft mapper crowd, let's be positive about the good examples as well. And let's bring it all together into one happy OpenStreetMap family. This is the best diagram of all, isn't it? I'll leave you with that diagram. Thank you very much.
So thank you. I was thinking all the time, where should I ask a question? So many topics. So I think because we don't have so much time and have to continue with the next talk, just send him for the next year more diagrams.
Yeah. Do send me more diagrams.
Good idea.
Grab me afterwards if you have any questions.
Okay. And I think it's a good time to make an announcement now. Two things. Tomorrow at 8:30 there's another photo session. So 8:30 in the morning after breakfast. And you don't come here, but you go directly to the castle, in front of the castle. So if it doesn't rain, and if you're not sure, you can check Twitter or some, yeah. If it rains, it will be cancelled. But otherwise, if you wake up in the morning and have time, come at 8:30 to take an outdoor picture. And the second is, if you're looking for some place to drink and chat with people in the evening, it's very difficult in Japan to find large restaurants that everybody can enter. So the local team is selecting like 5 locations and handing out later distributing some small little papers where you get a list of them, and you can just go there and see if it's already full or if there are already other people. So that you don't have to search yourself. So we have some recommendations for tonight. Okay, and then take a seat. The last talk of the day is about challenges of open data in Japanese public transportation, presented by Masaki Ito.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Masaki Ito from the University of Tokyo. The title of my talk is Challenges of Open Data in Japanese Public Transport. So in this talk, I will basically introduce the state of the Japanese open data in public transportation. So basically, there's nothing open data in Japanese public transportation. So I will introduce how I started the open data movement in Japan. So as you know, that there are many open data in the public transportation in the world. This is, I think, that one of the famous examples is in the US. So there are more than 10 years history of open data in US. So if you visited the US transportation operator like New York, or even in small cities, there is operators of public transportation, including the bus or trains, local trains, and you can find the link for the developers, and there you can just download the data, schedule data, or in sometimes you can access to the real-time data of the bus location like GPS data. So, and also some web page introduces the applications developed by the developers, and so this is what is happening in US more than 10 years. So it started in 2005, and the number of operators that provide open data is increasing. I don't have the latest data, but even in 2020, almost 30% public transportation operators has open data. I guess this is the number is increasing in nowadays. So also in Europe, open data is also popular for public transportation operators. This example is one is from London, one is from France, and one is Germany and the Deutsche Bahn. And these companies are providing open data. They are scheduled as open data, and some provide their data, some provide their real-time data with their API. So I guess the important factor in the open data is they standardized the data format. GTFS is the, I guess, the de facto standard of format of public transportation schedules, and it contains timetable. It contains the location and names of stops, like bus stops or stations, and it sometimes contains the shape of route, and the format is simple CSV. So you can, if you download the data, you can just extract the data just by accessing the text file with very easy way. So this is the standard format, GTFS. So another important factor is, of course, the license. So this is an example of license showing on BART. This is a local train in San Francisco, and the license is only 4 sentences, very simple. You can just use the data even for the commercial use. So the public transportation operators want to encourage you to use this data to increase the number of passengers. So this is what is happening in the world. So also, you may think if there's many GTFS data, but it's easy to find the data. There are some repositories that provide easy access to the world GTFS data. So you can find a transit rent or transit fees. This provides the worldwide data in a single access point. You can just access to the web page, and you can just get the whole world data very easy way. So this is what is happening. So how about Japan? Actually, Japan has a long history of route planner. In 1988, Expert, I guess this is the world's first commercial route planner. It runs on MS-DOS, not Windows, not even Windows. and even, in 1998, Jordan also released the route planner, which contains scheduled data. So in the Expert, there's no scheduled data, just telling the path where they should need to change the data, change the trains. But in 1998, they provide the data with the schedule, time schedule. So we can just follow this instruction, even taking the complex Japanese railway system. So it's very simple. And Japan has a long history, almost 30 years history of route planner. And during this development process, they established the commercialized system to trade train scheduled data. So JR is the largest railway company in Japan. This was originally the national railway company, but now it's the private company. Anyway, they one single company aggregated the data and published the data to the user of the data. Nowadays, Google, Apple, and of course Japanese railway planner is buying this data from the JR. So I think that price is millions of dollars, so it's very expensive. But this system was established more than almost 20 years ago. So this is continuing, and there's no open data in Japan. So this is the state of the Japanese GTFS open data in 2014. There was nothing, no open data. So if you are trying to find the Japanese data, there's no data. So this is what was there in 2014. But imagine there's a hierarchy in transportation system. Of course, on top of the hierarchy is Shinkansen train. This is very first, and this runs very long distance, and the price is expensive, and number of passengers but very large. But the number of Shinkansen line is limited. And maybe the middle of the hierarchy would be the regional railway or intercity bus. The price is middle, and number of passengers is middle, and maybe the lowest of the hierarchy is a route regional bus or even minibus. Very small bus is running around the city, and number of passengers is small, and it goes very rural area, but the frequency is very small, but the number of lines is very large. I guess in Japan there's hundreds of thousands of lines of minibus or regional bus. So this number is very large, but the IT skill is often very low, and they don't provide digital data, and we cannot find that these route bus with a smartphone application like Google Maps. So I focus on this bottom and start to try the open data with this bottom transportation system. So in 2014, I and my friends developed Open Transit. So we started this project, and this is a web-based database, and it provides easy user interface to input the timetable on the web and store the scheduled data. So you can access the web page and find the map and timetable, but important feature of the Open Transit is you can download the data in GTFS format. This is the standard format. So anybody can download the data, anybody can use it. So we conducted the field experiment in Shizuoka Prefecture with Open Transit. So and published the route bus data in GTFS format in Kakegawa, Omaezaki, and Susono City. So, and also held a hackathon to ask the local community to develop some applications with this data. Also, we deliver this data to Google. So what happened is, one is many local people started to think of the application they need. So they now have a chance to develop their own application using this data. And another thing is, you can now find this bus on Google Map. So you can just search the data. So even you don't know the very detailed information of the local bus, you can just take it. So it's very easy. So this is the state of the Japanese GTFS open data in 2015. Only one prefecture has open data. So the next step is how to spread this movement to another areas in Japan. So we started advertisement and recruiting, because I'm alone. I can not do by myself. So finding friends to work together is very important factor. Sharing the vision is important. So I visited many academic conference or industrial conference of information technology or transportation, and asked many people to work together. So also on the web, I published almost every slide of my talk. So you can find my slide on the web. So this is very good, because if people are trying to search on the web, you can find this even without knowing myself. Also, I introduced the situation of the world. One is the article telling the situation of London, and the other is the article about the US. So now you can find what is happening in the world. So open data is important, is my message here. Also, I contributed the article to the industry newspaper. I guess many experts read this kind of newspaper, so I published my article here, but I guess there's no response to this kind of approach. They already had living in the established system, so they don't have a strong intention to start new things. Anyway, so also actually this is not myself, but my wife translate GTFS story into Japanese. So GTFS story is the document that describes the starting story of GTFS with the TriMet, that was the transportation operator in Oregon, and with the Google engineer, they worked together and developed the GTFS format there. And after, in 2005, after that, the movement has spread it to the US, and now the open data movement is very popular in the world. So I translated this beginning story into Japanese and published on the web. Also, I organized a symposium. The title is Transportation Geomedia Summit in early 2016. So important thing is many people, I asked many people to speak on the stage. So some is from the government, and some is from the route planner developers, and some is from railway or bus companies, or some is university, including me, and some is just a community-based developer independent researchers. But the one things we can share is we love buses. We believe that we cannot continue this situation to even maintain the Japanese route bus service because the population of Japan is decreasing. So even just keeping the route bus service is very difficult in Japanese situation. So how to maintain the Japanese public transportation system is very important issue in Japanese society. And some of my friends asked me to give a lecture because I'm not asking them to start GTFS data, but many people knows I'm working on it and asked me to give a lecture. So this is one example I held in Nomi City in Ishikawa Prefecture. I had a talk here, and Nomi City is a very early example to start open data. So in the early 2017, GTFS data, open data, has spread in the world in Japan. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 example here. One is in Yamanashi City. There was a very high-skilled professor in Yamanashi University, and he understand the advantage of open data and started to open their data in GTFS. And one is Nomi City that I mentioned, and one is in Kyushu, Fukuoka Prefecture. And there's a university researchers who has a strong motivation for the public transportation, and they started to open their data together with students. So this is not my result, but this is done by many key persons in each area independently, but we are sharing the vision and we are sharing the motivation, and so this is the situation in early 2017, and big news happens. The Japanese government standardized bus data format. So the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport and Tourism, the name is very long. So Ministry of Transportation basically has made a commission for bus data, and actually I was a chair of this commission and gather many people like route planner developer or diagram making developer and many related people, and had a very tough discussion in the ministry. So the important thing is not only us, but the developer, many developers joined to the discussion, because some of them are competitors, so they do not often talk like that. But I asked them to come to the university, because this is the university, and this is a freedom. There's no commercial system, so we can share anything. So, and we share the pizza and food and drink and together, and we talked a lot about the route bus data by breaking the border of the competitor. So, and finally, we proposed the Japanese standard route bus format. But actually, this is not the original or unique one. This is 100% compatible to GTFS. So, and we also add some additional element specialized to Japanese route bus system. But basically, this is compatible, and publish the manual of the open data under the name of the government. This is the manual, so you can download this document. This is in total 50 pages document, and anybody can now access to the data the document and how it tells how to make the GTFS data, especially caring for the Japanese root bus system. So what is happening now is many prefecture is starting to open data project for public transportation. For example, Gunma prefecture is asking their cities in the prefecture to open their data, and also ask me to give a lecture to the member of the city officers. Also, same thing is happening in Toyama and Okayama or Aomori. So this is an example of Aomori. So here, the route bus operators and city officers invited me and to give a lecture about the open data and GTFS. So I had a 3 hours lecture to them. So the very detailed, very to the detailed topic to the GTFS. So this is what is happening. Also, we are planning to give a lecture of free bus timetable maker in the next week. So this is now only available in Japan, but the very advanced timetable make application is available in Japan without paying anything. So if you are interested in making the GTFS data, you can use this software without paying. So this is a very good chance. So now we are working to start open data movement for the route bus or minibus. This is not the very, the number of the route bus is very large and the IT skill is not so high. But actually, I guess the JR also has a strong interest to the open data because JR has a technical connection to the Deutsche Bahn, DB, and DB in Germany sometimes has already started open data and sometimes have a hackathon, hold a hackathon to communicate with developers. So in this May, JR joined to the DB hackathon by providing the data to the German developers. So in the DB hackathon held in Berlin, the participant can access to the both Deutsche Bahn data and JR data. So JR has just started to study what the open data is, I think. But anyway, this is happening, and JR has starting to study what is happening in the world. Actually, I was there, and I developed some application and got a prize like that. And also, I documented this what happened in Japanese and introduced this is happening, what is happening. So I think some Japanese read this document. So I guess even the people in JR also read this document. So I hope they have a good impression to the document. So remember the hierarchy. So the top data is already commercialized. So it's very expensive. No one can access to the data without paying. So I studied the open data from the bottom. But JR has an interest to the open data. So now the actual number of open data is very small. The number of the total public transportation operators, I guess in Japan is more than 1,000, and the number of open data is maybe 10 or around, very small. But I think the open data movement in Japan is still arising and maybe increasing. So I will work toward this to 100% open data. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think if you want to really change something in Japan that is like old and so old structures, you really have to work at Tokyo University. Does somebody have a question? It's the last talk, so we have time.
Yeah, hi. I used to work for SNCF Open Data team, so I know the topic a bit. We made a mistake when we published the first Open Data GTFS. We write it in French.
Aha.
So I wonder which language are you using, because we are talking about standards, but the language is also part of it.
Yeah. This is actually why I came here. So I basically communicate with Japanese operator in Japanese, and at first what I need to do is just telling what is happening in Japanese. So I think what I need to do is just translate it, what is happening in the world, into Japanese. But I think if I want to make the movement more larger or more eager, I need to both translate from Japanese to English. So the English is maybe the common language for the world. So I found I need to introduce what is happening in Japan to English. So I need to introduce what is happening. So this is my finding, and maybe we have same opinion now.
Okay, somebody else?
So what's the current status of the coverage in terms of GTFS in Japan?
Coverage, yeah, good question. And it's actually very, very small, maybe less than 1%, because the number of operators is maybe I think more than 1,000, and number of open data is 10 or around. So this is very small. So I need to work much more harder to increase the number. Thank you.
Is the data already publicly accessible? The collected data?
Yeah, open data is of course accessible, but it's very small. I think this is the not all, but this is the almost all open data available in Japan. So you can find some of them are available on transit feed or transit run, so you can now download it.
Okay. Thank you again very much for. Was there another question? I didn't see. Okay, sorry.
What information is specific to Japanese GTFS
Oh.
compared to the default one?
Okay. So this is some specialized topic of Japanese, but many route bus company has the branch office, like Fukushima route bus company. There are many branches in each cities, and each city has a different system in operating the route bus. So not only company information is not enough to tell the route bus system. We need to add branch name. This bus belongs to the Wakamatsu branch, or this bus belongs to the another branch, or this kind of information is important. This is not all, but this is one example of Japanese specific topic to add GTFS data. So branch information.
Okay. Then thank you again. It was very interesting, I think. And one more important thing for tomorrow. Don't forget your name card. Very important. Don't leave it in the hotel. So it's your entrance to the conference. Okay, so I hope to see some of you maybe in a pub, izakaya, or see you then. And thank you very much.
Thank you.